The Imperial fleet, led by the battle-hardened Commander Vorkrak, approached the uncharted system with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Their sensors had detected a lone rocky planet orbiting a modest yellow star. Nothing extraordinary by the Empire's standards. However, the complete absence of any artificial satellites or orbital stations around the planet piqued their interest. What could possibly be of value on that backwater world? Vorkrak mused aloud, stroking his chin thoughtfully. There are no apparent signs of advanced technological development. Perhaps the inhabitants are primitive, barely clinging to the basics of civilization. One of the navigation officers spoke up nervously. "Sir, our scans are detecting unusual energy readings emanating from the planet's surface. It's unlike anything we've encountered before." Vorkrak narrowed his eyes. "Interesting. Dispatch a squadron of scouts to investigate further. I want a full report on the nature of these readings and any potential threats they may pose." The sleek Imperial scout ships broke off from the main fleet, their advanced sensor arrays probing the planet's atmosphere and surface. As they breached the upper atmosphere, the crews were immediately struck by the sheer diversity of the landscape below. Lush green forests, vast expanses of rolling grasslands, towering mountain ranges, and sprawling urban centers. This was no barren, lifeless rock. "By the Empress, look at that!" one of the pilots exclaimed, pointing to a massive structure rising from the heart of a bustling city. "That building alone is larger than our entire command ship." Before the pilot could finish his thought, a blinding flash of light erupted from the structure, accompanied by a deafening sonic boom. The scout ships shuddered as a barrage of high-velocity projectiles streaked towards them, moving with such speed that their onboard defensive systems had no time to react. "Evasive maneuvers," the squadron leader shouted, but it was too late. The projectiles tore through the scout ships, shredding their hulls and sending them spiraling out of control. One by one, the Imperial vessels were reduced to burning wrecks, plummeting towards the surface below. Back on the command ship, Vorkrak watched in stunned silence as the feeds from the scout ships went dark. What manner of weapons are these?" he stammered, his confidence wavering. "Nothing in our arsenal should be vulnerable to such crude projectiles." The communications officer's voice trembled as he relayed the grim report. "Sir, we've lost all contact with the scout squadron. Their ships have been completely destroyed." Vorkrak's jaw tightened, his brow furrowing with a mix of anger and trepidation. "Inform the Emperor immediately. This primitive world poses a far greater threat than we anticipated. Prepare the fleet for a full-scale assault. We will crush these humans and claim their planet for the glory of the Empire." As the Imperial warships readied themselves for the impending invasion, a lone figure stood atop the gleaming spire in the heart of the human city, gazing out at the gathering fleet with a mixture of concern and resolve. General Amanda Riggs, the brilliant military strategist who had orchestrated the devastating counterstrike against the scout ships, knew that this was only the beginning of a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Empire. "So the aliens have come," she murmured, her eyes narrowing. "Let them come then. We'll show them the true might of humanity." The Imperial fleet, its confidence shaken by the devastating losses of the scout ships, cautiously approached the human homeworld, its sensors probing the planet's defenses. What they encountered only deepened their growing sense of unease. "Sir, our scans are detecting an extensive network of advanced missile batteries and energy weapon emplacements covering the planet's surface," the weapons officer reported, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Their range and firepower far exceed anything in our arsenal." Commander Vorkrak gripped the arm of his command chair, his knuckles turning white. "Impossible. How could these primitives have developed such formidable technology?" "Unknown, sir," the officer replied. "But the data is undeniable. If we attempt to breach their atmosphere, we will be met with overwhelming force." Vorkrak's brow furrowed as he contemplated his options. The Emperor had demanded the annihilation of the human species, but the reconnaissance data painted a bleak picture. Their vaunted Imperial might seemed woefully inadequate against the humans' unexpected technological superiority. "Order the fleet to hold position," Vorkrak commanded. "We must regroup and reevaluate our strategy. I will not risk the lives of my crew on a suicidal assault." Across the vast expanse of space, the human military command center in the heart of the bustling city hummed with activity. General Riggs, her piercing gaze fixed on the tactical displays, observed the Imperial fleet's cautious movements with a mixture of relief and concern. "They're holding position," she murmured, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the console. "Good, they'd finally realized the folly of their invasion." A young lieutenant approached Riggs, his expression grave. "General, our sensors indicate the aliens are sending a subspace transmission. We believe they are communicating with their homeworld." Riggs nodded, her mind racing. Then they've realized they're outmatched. No doubt they're pleading for reinforcements or seeking guidance from their leaders. The lieutenant hesitated, then continued, "There's more, ma'am. Our analysts have detected an unusual energy buildup within the alien vessels. It's consistent with the charging of their primary weapon systems." Riggs's eyes narrowed. "They mean to bombard us from orbit." She turned to the communications officer. "Activate the planetary defense grid and prepare for a full-scale assault. If those aliens think they can cower in space and rain destruction upon us, they have another thing coming." As the human forces readied themselves for the impending bombardment, Commander Vorkrak's expression darkened. He had never backed down from a fight, but the data before him painted a grim picture. The humans' defenses were far more formidable than the Empire had anticipated, and a direct assault would be suicidal. "Helm, prepare the fleet for a jump to hyperspace," Vorkrak ordered, his voice laced with reluctance. "We must retreat and report our findings to the Emperor." The ships began to power up their engines, readying to make the jump to the safety of hyperspace. But before they could complete the maneuver, a series of high-energy projectiles streaked towards the Imperial fleet, seemingly appearing from nowhere. "Evasive maneuvers," Vorkrak barked, but it was too late. The deadly salvos tore through the shields and hulls of the warships, causing catastrophic damage. Explosions rippled through the fleet as the humans' fearsome weapons unleashed their fury. Vorkrak watched in horror as his once mighty vessels were reduced to burning wrecks, drifting helplessly in the void. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. "How can they possess such power?" On the surface, General Riggs observed the carnage with a grim expression. "They've sealed their fate," she said, her tone unwavering. "No one threatens humanity and lives to tell the tale." As the last of the Imperial ships succumbed to the human onslaught, Commander Vorkrak knew that he had failed in his mission. With his fleet in ruins and his crew facing certain death, he had no choice but to make a desperate gamble for survival. "All hands, abandon ship," he bellowed. "May the Empress have mercy on our souls." As the battered remnants of the Imperial fleet drifted helplessly in the void, their once proud vessels reduced to smoldering wrecks, Commander Vorkrak and his surviving crew huddled in the cramped confines of the emergency escape pods. Battered and bruised, they could only watch in stunned silence as the human defenses continued to rain devastation upon the hapless Imperial ships. "By the Empress," Vorkrak muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "How could this have happened?" The communications officer, her face pale and drawn, spoke up. "Sir, we've lost all contact with the main fleet. Our distress signals are being jammed. We're on our own." Vorkrak's jaw tightened, and he clenched his fists in frustration. "Damn these humans and their accursed technology. We were the mightiest military force in the galaxy, and they've reduced us to fleeing like cowards." A young lieutenant, his expression resolute, interjected. "With respect, sir, we're lucky to be alive. Those human weapons tore through our shields and hulls like they were made of paper. We never stood a chance." Vorkrak shot the lieutenant a withering glare. "That's no excuse for retreat, boy. The Empire does not tolerate failure. We must find a way to salvage this mission and prove our worth to the Emperor." The lieutenant hesitated, then replied, "But, sir, even if we could somehow reach the Imperial homeworld, what hope do we have of convincing the Emperor to send more forces? These humans have demonstrated a level of technological superiority that we simply cannot match." Vorkrak's eyes narrowed as he contemplated the lieutenant's words. Deep down, he knew the grim reality of their situation. The humans had outmatched the might of the Galactic Empire, and the thought of returning to face the Emperor's wrath filled him with dread. "Then we have no choice," Vorkrak said, his voice low and resigned. "We must seek asylum with one of the outer colonies, far from the Emperor's reach. Perhaps there, we can regroup and devise a plan to warn the galaxy of this human menace." As the escape pods drifted away from the devastated Imperial fleet, Vorkrak cast one last, anguished glance towards the human homeworld, its surface now obscured by the smoke and debris of the failed invasion. "Mark my words, humans," he muttered, his fists clenching in impotent rage. "This is not the last you'll see of the Galactic Empire." Back on the surface, General Riggs and her command staff watched the unfolding events with a mixture of relief and concern. The human defensive grid had proven its effectiveness, but the sheer scale of the Imperial invasion force had given them pause. "They're retreating," Riggs observed, her brow furrowed. "But something tells me this is far from over." The communications officer stepped forward, his expression grave. "General, we're picking up a powerful subspace transmission from the surviving Imperial vessels. It appears they're attempting to contact the Galactic Core." Riggs nodded, her mind racing. "They're going to report our capabilities to the Emperor. No doubt he'll send even greater forces to subjugate us." She turned to her staff, her gaze steely and resolute. "Increase the readiness of our planetary defense grid. Prepare our military forces for a prolonged conflict. We must be ready to defend our world against the full might of the Galactic Empire." As the escape pods carrying the battered Imperial survivors drifted away from the human homeworld, Vorkrak knew that his mission had ended in utter failure. But deep within him, a spark of determination had been kindled. He would not return to the Emperor empty-handed. He would find a way to rally the outer colonies, to forge an alliance that could stand against the human menace. "This is not the end," Vorkrak vowed, his voice low and determined. "The Galactic Empire will have its revenge." The news of the Imperial fleet's devastating defeat at the hands of the mysterious humans spread like wildfire through the corridors of power in the Galactic Empire's capital. The Emperor, once dismissive of any potential threats to his dominion, now convened his most trusted advisors in a hastily arranged emergency summit. "This is an outrage," the Emperor roared, his face flushed with rage. "How could a handful of primitive backwater dwellers defeat the might of our armada?" One of the advisors, a seasoned diplomat named Arleth, spoke up cautiously. "Your Majesty, the reports from the surviving crew paint a disturbing picture. These humans possess technological capabilities that far exceed our own. Their defensive systems were able to neutralize our most advanced weaponry with ease." The Emperor narrowed his eyes, his hands clenching the armrests of his throne. "Impossible. The Imperial military is unmatched in all the galaxy. There is no alien civilization that can stand against us." Arleth grimaced, knowing that the Emperor's pride would make him resistant to any notion of weakness. "With respect, sire, the evidence is undeniable. The human homeworld is shielded by a vast network of automated defense systems, capable of launching devastating counterstrikes against our ships. Our scouts were overwhelmed and destroyed before they could even mount a proper assault." The Emperor's gaze swept across the gathered advisors, his expression darkening. "Then we must dispatch a larger force to crush these upstart humans and reclaim their pitiful world. I will not tolerate any challenge to the supremacy of the Galactic Empire." Another advisor, a military strategist named Varric, cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, I must caution against such rash action. The reports indicate that a larger assault may meet with a similar fate. These humans have developed technologies that render our conventional tactics and superior numbers ineffective. Varric paused, his expression grave. We may need to rethink our approach entirely. Brute force alone will not be enough to overcome this new adversary. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. Are you suggesting that the might of the Galactic Empire is not enough to subjugate a single insignificant world? He hissed. I will not be lectured on military strategy by the likes of you, Varric. Prepare the mightiest armada the galaxy has ever seen. We will crush these humans and make an example of them for any who dare to defy the Imperial will. As the Emperor's orders echoed through the halls of the palace, a sense of trepidation began to creep through the ranks of the Imperial advisors. Arleth and Varric exchanged worried glances, both knowing that the Emperor's pride and unwillingness to acknowledge any weakness would likely lead to an even greater disaster. This will not end well, Arleth murmured, his brow furrowed with concern. The humans have proven themselves more than a match for our forces. Sending wave after wave of Imperial troops to their slaughter will only hasten the downfall of the Empire. Varric nodded solemnly. Then we must find a way to convince the Emperor to reconsider his course of action. The fate of the entire galaxy may rest on our ability to reason with him. As the advisors departed, each grappling with the weight of the decision that lay ahead, the Emperor remained alone in his throne room, his mind consumed by thoughts of vengeance. The humans had dared to defy the might of the Galactic Empire, and he would not rest until their defiance was crushed, their world reduced to ashes. They will learn the true price of challenging my rule, the Emperor declared, his voice dripping with malice. No one escapes the wrath of the Galactic Empire. On the distant human homeworld, General Riggs and her command staff were closely monitoring the Imperial transmissions, their brows furrowed with concern. The sheer scale of the impending Imperial invasion force promised a conflict of unimaginable devastation. They're not going to back down, are they? Riggs murmured, her gaze fixed on the tactical displays. The communications officer shook his head grimly. No, ma'am. The Emperor is determined to crush us, no matter the cost. Riggs nodded, her expression hardening. Then we must be ready. Activate the full might of our planetary defenses. Mobilize every capable citizen for the defense of our world. This will be a fight for our very survival. As the human forces braced themselves for the coming onslaught, the stage was set for a clash of civilizations that would echo through the ages, a battle that would determine the fate of not just the human homeworld, but the entire galactic order. The Imperial capital was a flurry of frenetic activity as the Emperor's orders were relayed to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. Legions of elite shock troops, supported by the most advanced warships and weapons the Empire could muster, were mobilized for the impending invasion of the human homeworld. At the forefront of this mighty armada was the flagship of the Imperial fleet, the colossal dreadnought known as the Eternal Vengeance. Its towering bulk dwarfed the surrounding vessels, its formidable arsenal of particle beams, missile batteries, and gravitational disruptors, ready to unleash a devastating barrage upon the unsuspecting human defenses. As the Imperial fleet neared the edge of the human system, the seasoned commander of the Eternal Vengeance, Admiral Volkov, addressed his crew with a steely resolve. Men, today we stand on the precipice of a great victory for the Galactic Empire, he declared, his voice booming across the command deck. These humans have dared to challenge our might, and they shall be made to pay the ultimate price for their insolence. The crew responded with a roar of approval, their eagerness for battle palpable. Volkov raised his hand, silencing them. But do not be lulled into a false sense of security. The reports from our previous engagement paint a dire picture. These humans possess advanced technologies that have proven capable of overwhelming our forces. We must not underestimate them again. Volkov's gaze swept across the assembled officers, his expression hardening. We will approach with caution and precision. Our objective is to neutralize their planetary defenses and secure a foothold on the surface. Only then can we begin the systematic subjugation of the human population. With a curt nod, The Admiral turned to the navigation officer. "Helm, take us in. But be ready to execute evasive maneuvers at the first sign of trouble." As the Imperial fleet breached the outer edge of the human system, their sensors immediately detected the extensive network of defensive emplacements that blanketed the planet's surface. Volkov's brow furrowed with a mixture of apprehension and determination. "Launch the first wave of bombardment drones," he ordered, his voice sharp and decisive. "Let's see how these humans handle a sustained barrage of our most powerful ordnance." Hundreds of sleek, arrow-shaped drones detached from the Imperial vessels, their targeting systems locked onto the human defense grid. In a dazzling display of firepower, they unleashed a relentless hail of particle beams, plasma missiles, and gravitational disruptors upon the planet below. But as the smoke and debris began to clear, the crews of the Imperial fleet were met with a sight that chilled their blood. The human defenses, though battered, had withstood the assault with remarkable resilience, their automated countermeasures neutralizing the majority of the incoming ordnance. "Impossible," Volkov growled, his fist slamming against the console. "How can their defenses be so impervious to our attack?" Before the Admiral could issue further orders, a series of high-speed projectiles streaked towards the Imperial fleet, punching through their shields with ease. Explosions rocked the vessels as the humans' deadly weapons tore through their hulls, causing catastrophic damage. "Evasive maneuvers," Volkov barked, his voice laced with panic. "All ships, return fire." But the human craft, nimble and agile, darted between the larger Imperial vessels with lightning speed, delivering devastating salvos that left the mighty dreadnoughts and their escorts helpless. Volkov could only watch in horror as the once proud Imperial armada was reduced to a graveyard of twisted metal and vaporized matter. His crew, their confidence shaken, pleaded with him to order a full retreat, but the Admiral's pride and the Emperor's unforgiving demands left him with no choice but to press on. "We fight to the last," Volkov roared, his voice laced with a desperate, unflinching determination. "The Galactic Empire will not be defeated by these savages." As the battle raged on, the human forces unleashed even more devastating weapons, turning the Imperial fleet into a floating tomb. Volkov, his last moments consumed by the crushing realization of his failure, could only utter a final, anguished cry before his ship was consumed in a blinding explosion. On the surface of the human homeworld, General Riggs watched the unfolding carnage with a mix of relief and grim resolve. The Imperial invasion force had been met with the same devastating fate as their reconnaissance fleet, but she knew that this was only the beginning. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she murmured, her brow furrowed with concern. "The Emperor will send wave after wave of his forces to try and break us." Riggs turned to her command staff, her expression hardening. "Increase the readiness of our orbital defense platforms. Mobilize every able-bodied citizen for ground defense. This is a fight for our very survival." As the smoke and debris of the defeated Imperial fleet drifted through the void, the human homeworld braced itself for the next stage of the conflict, a battle that would ultimately decide the fate of the Galactic Empire itself. The skies above the human homeworld were ablaze with the fiery wreckage of the shattered Imperial fleet. Admiral Volkov's final desperate gambit to overwhelm the human defenses had ended in utter annihilation, leaving the once mighty armada reduced to a graveyard of twisted metal and vaporized matter. From the command center of the human military, General Riggs and her staff watched the unfolding carnage with a mixture of grim satisfaction and growing concern. While the humans had emerged victorious, the scale of the Imperial assault had been far greater than they had anticipated. "By all the stars," Riggs murmured, her brow furrowed. "They just keep coming, wave after wave. We can't sustain these kinds of losses indefinitely." The communications officer, his face grim, approached the general. "Ma'am, the latest reports indicate that the surviving Imperial ships are attempting to retreat, but they're being pursued by our interceptors, and we're inflicting heavy damage." Riggs nodded, her expression hardening. "Good. Let no one escape to report our weaknesses. We cannot afford to allow the Galactic Empire to regroup and return with even greater force. As the human forces continued their relentless assault on the retreating Imperial vessels, the battered survivors of the once mighty armada desperately fought to escape the system. At the helm of the crippled flagship, Volkov's hands gripped the controls, his knuckles white with the strain. "Helm, full power to the engines," the Admiral barked, his voice tinged with desperation. "We must reach the jump coordinates before those cursed human craft catch us." The navigation officer, his face pale and drawn, shook his head. "Sir, the engines are barely functioning. We're hemorrhaging plasma, and our maneuverability is severely compromised. We'll never make it in time." Volkov's jaw tightened, and he fought back the rising tide of panic that threatened to consume him. "Then we fight to the last. Divert all remaining power to the weapon systems and prepare for a last stand." As the Imperial flagship turned to face the pursuing human interceptors, Volkov knew that their chances of survival were grim. The human vessels, nimble and agile, darted between the larger Imperial ships with ease, delivering devastating salvos that tore through their battered hulls. "Sir, the engines are going critical," the engineering officer shouted. "We're going to lose the whole ship." Volkov's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Then so be it. Set a collision course with the nearest human craft. We'll take as many of them down with us as we can." The flagship lurched forward, its damaged engines straining to maintain thrust as it hurtled towards the swarming human interceptors. Volkov gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white, as he watched the rapidly approaching target through the viewscreen. "For the glory of the Galactic Empire," he roared, his voice echoing through the command deck as the flagship's weapons unleashed a final desperate barrage. The human interceptors, taken off guard by the Admiral's suicidal maneuver, were unable to evade the incoming Imperial vessel. The flagship slammed into the lead craft, the resulting explosion consuming both vessels in a blinding flash of light. As the shockwave subsided, the remaining human interceptors swept through the debris, searching for any signs of surviving Imperial ships. But the once mighty armada had been reduced to little more than scattered fragments, drifting silently through the void. Back on the human homeworld, Riggs and her staff pored over the tactical displays, their expressions grim. "We've won the battle, but at a heavy cost," Riggs murmured, her eyes narrowing. "The Imperial forces are in retreat, but I fear this is only the beginning." The communications officer stepped forward, his voice somber. "Ma'am, our latest intelligence reports indicate that the surviving Imperial ships have managed to escape the system. They're transmitting distress signals and emergency communications, likely to their homeworld." Riggs nodded, her brow furrowing. "Then the Emperor will know of our capabilities, and he'll stop at nothing to crush us. We must prepare for the full might of the Galactic Empire to descend upon our world." The human command staff exchanged troubled glances, the weight of the task ahead settling heavily upon their shoulders. They had won a decisive victory, but they knew that the true test of their resolve was yet to come. "Activate the planetary shield grid," Riggs ordered, her voice firm and resolute. "Mobilize every available resource for the defense of our homeworld. We will show the Galactic Empire the true strength of humanity." The Emperor's throne room was shrouded in an ominous silence as the harrowing reports from the shattered remnants of the Imperial fleet filtered in. The once mighty armada, led by the formidable Admiral Volkov, had been annihilated by the unexpected technological might of the human homeworld. The Emperor, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and disbelief, slowly rose from his throne, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. This cannot be," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "The Galactic Empire does not suffer defeat at the hands of some insignificant backwater civilization." The few surviving Imperial officers, their uniforms tattered and faces drawn, stood before the Emperor, their eyes downcast, unable to meet his gaze. One of them, a young lieutenant, mustered the courage to speak. "Your Majesty, the humans have developed weapons and defenses that are beyond anything we've encountered. Our forces were simply overwhelmed. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. "Excuses, Lieutenant. I will not tolerate failure from my loyal subjects. You and your comrades have brought shame upon the Empire. There can be only one punishment for such a grievous offense." The lieutenant's face paled, and he took a step back, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "Please, Your Majesty, we did all that we could, but the humans—" His words were cut short as the Emperor's personal guards seized him, dragging the hapless officer away to his doom. The remaining officers watched in horrified silence, their resolve crumbling in the face of the Emperor's ruthless wrath. "Let this be a lesson to all who dare to defy the might of the Galactic Empire," the Emperor declared, his voice dripping with malice. "These humans will pay for their insolence, no matter the cost." He turned to his advisors, his expression hardening. "Prepare a force unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. I want every available warship, every elite soldier, every last ounce of our military might, focused on the complete subjugation of this human homeworld." Arleth, the seasoned diplomat, stepped forward, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, I must caution against such a reckless course of action. The reports indicate that the humans possess formidable defensive capabilities that have proven resilient against even our most powerful assaults. Sending wave after wave of our forces to their slaughter may only hasten the downfall of the Empire." The Emperor's gaze locked onto Arleth, his eyes burning with a furious intensity. "Are you questioning my judgment, Arleth? Do you dare to defy the will of your Emperor?" Arleth hesitated, his resolve wavering under the weight of the Emperor's withering glare. "No, Your Majesty. I merely seek to advise caution for the good of the Empire." The Emperor's lips curled into a malicious smile. "Good. Then see to it that my orders are carried out, without delay. I want this human world reduced to ashes, and their pitiful species eradicated before the end of the cycle." As the advisors hurried to fulfill the Emperor's demands, Arleth and Varric exchanged troubled glances, their concerns about the impending disaster weighing heavily upon them. "This will not end well," Arleth murmured, his brow furrowed with worry. "The Emperor's pride and thirst for vengeance will only lead us down a path of ruin." Varric nodded solemnly. "We must find a way to convince him to reconsider this course of action, or the Galactic Empire itself may fall before the might of the humans." Meanwhile, on the human homeworld, General Riggs and her command staff pored over the latest intelligence reports, their expressions grim. "The surviving Imperial ships have reached the core worlds," Riggs announced, her voice laced with concern. "They're transmitting distress signals and emergency communications, warning the Emperor of our capabilities." The communications officer stepped forward, his face pale. "Ma'am, our analysts believe the Emperor is preparing to mobilize the full might of the Galactic Empire against us. We're detecting the movement of massive military forces towards our system." Riggs nodded, her jaw tightening. "Then we must be ready. Activate the planetary shield grid and put all military forces on high alert. If the Galactic Empire thinks they can crush us with brute force, they're in for a rude awakening." She turned to her staff, her eyes burning with determination. "We've shown the Empire the power of humanity once before. Now we must be prepared to do so again, on an even greater scale. The fate of our world, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rests on our ability to stand firm against their onslaught." As the human forces braced themselves for the impending Imperial assault, the Emperor's advisors, Arleth and Varric, grappled with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. They knew that the Emperor's pride and unwillingness to acknowledge any weakness would likely lead to an even greater disaster, one that could ultimately seal the fate of the Galactic Empire itself. As word of the humans' decisive victory over the Imperial invasion force spread through the known galaxy, it sent shockwaves of awe, fear, and opportunity rippling across the diverse range of alien civilizations that had long lived under the shadow of the Galactic Empire's might. Some, sensing a chance to challenge the crumbling power of the once dominant regime, began to covertly align themselves with the human faction, seeking to forge an alliance that could tip the delicate balance of power. These opportunistic factions, long subjugated by the imperial order, saw the humans as a potential ally in their struggle for independence and self-determination. "This is our chance," whispered Karn, the leader of a rebellious Zerthan colony, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of hope and ambition. "If we can forge an alliance with these humans, we may finally be able to break free of the Empire's oppressive rule." Karn's lieutenants exchanged cautious glances, their expressions a mix of excitement and trepidation. "But what if the humans refuse to cooperate?" one of them asked, his brow furrowed. "The Empire will come down on us with all its might if they discover our plans." Karn's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening. "Then we must convince the humans that our interests are aligned. We have the resources, the manpower, and the will to fight alongside them against the Imperial forces. Together, we can shatter the Empire's grip on the galaxy once and for all." While some alien civilizations saw the humans' triumph as an opportunity to assert their own independence, others were gripped by a paralyzing fear, convinced that the only way to ensure their own survival was to sever all ties to the humans and retreat to the furthest reaches of the cosmos. On the remote Thelonian homeworld, the elders of the Council convened in a secretive, closed-door session, their faces etched with grave concern. "The reports are true." Then one of the elders spoke, his voice trembling. "These humans have single-handedly defeated the might of the Galactic Empire. Unthinkable." Another elder, his brow furrowed, interjected, "We must act quickly. If the humans turn their attention towards our system, we will be defenseless against their wrath. We must prepare to evacuate our people to the remote outposts beyond the known galaxy." The gathered elders murmured in agreement, their expressions grim. "Yes, yes, it is the only way. We cannot risk the annihilation of our entire species. The humans must be allowed to deal with the Empire, while we seek refuge in the uncharted void." As the Thelonian Council finalized their plans for a mass exodus, the human homeworld braced itself for the impending onslaught of the Galactic Empire's forces. General Riggs and her command staff pored over the latest intelligence reports, their expressions tense. "They're amassing a fleet unlike anything we've ever seen," Riggs announced, her voice low and grave. "Every available warship, every elite soldier, the full might of the Imperial military is being mobilized for this assault." The communications officer stepped forward, his face pale. "Ma'am, our analysts estimate the incoming force to be at least 10 times the size of the previous invasion. We may not be able to withstand such an overwhelming assault." Riggs' jaw tightened, but her gaze remained resolute. "Then we must be prepared to fight with every ounce of our strength. Activate the planetary shield grid and mobilize every able-bodied citizen for the defense of our homeworld. This battle will determine the fate of our species and perhaps the entire galaxy." As the human forces braced themselves for the impending onslaught, the Emperor's advisors, Arleth and Varric, continued their desperate attempts to reason with the stubborn ruler. "Your Majesty, please, you must reconsider this course of action," Arleth pleaded, his expression grave. "The evidence is clear. These humans possess technological capabilities that far exceed our own. Sending wave after wave of our forces to their slaughter will only hasten the downfall of the Galactic Empire." The Emperor's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a snarl. "Silence, Arleth. I will not be lectured on military strategy by the likes of you. The humans have dared to defy my rule, and they will be crushed, no matter the cost." Varric stepped forward, his tone measured but firm. "But sire, think of the consequences. If we lose this battle, the very foundations of the Galactic Empire could crumble. We must find a way to coexist with these humans, to understand their capabilities, and adapt our own strategies accordingly." The Emperor's gaze swept across the assembled advisors, his expression hardening. "Coexist. Adapt," he hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "No, The humans must be made an example of, a warning to any who would dare to challenge the might of the Galactic Empire. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. I want their homeworld reduced to ashes before the end of the cycle." As the advisors departed, their faces etched with a growing sense of dread. The stage was set for a clash of civilizations that would echo through the ages. The fate of the human homeworld, and perhaps the entire galactic order, hung in the balance as the full might of the Galactic Empire descended upon the unsuspecting planet.